anxiety about it. I never know what I'm going to read next. But
So is it true or untrue?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to comment.
For 25 years, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has been the royal family's most disciplined secret keeper, never breaking ranks, never feeding stories, and never letting a single word slip. But behind closed doors, a devastating accusation has shattered that historic silence. Palace insiders reveal that during the early Fab Four years, Sophie witnessed an alarming behind-the-scenes interaction between Meghan Markle and Prince William, a calculated behavior that permanently destroyed Meghan's royal credibility overnight. This wasn't just a minor social misstep. It was a boundary crossed that quietly set Megxit into motion. What did Sophie actually see? Let's unmask the palace files. The royal family's most dangerous witness. In the spring of 2001, Sophie Rees-Jones, then barely 2 years into her marriage to Prince Edward, sat across from a man she believed was a wealthy Arab sheikh interested in using her public relations firm for business. She had no idea she was being recorded. The conversation that followed nearly ended her royal career before it properly began. She made indiscreet comments about Tony Blair. She described the Queen as looking forward to the end of a state visit. She discussed potential business arrangements that raised serious conflict of interest, questions given her royal position. The news of the world published everything. The palace was furious. The public was unforgiving. And Sophie found herself at the center of exactly the kind of scandal that destroys reputations permanently. She did not run. She did not retaliate. She did not give a tearful interview or release a carefully drafted statement through a Hollywood publicist. She put her head down and she worked, for years, quietly, methodically, with a discipline and a humility that people inside the palace noticed and respected in equal measure. Queen Elizabeth, who had little patience for royal family members who put personal drama above institutional duty, watched Sophie's response to that crisis closely. What she saw apparently satisfied her completely. Over the following decade, Sophie became one of the late Queen's most trusted confidants, not because she was glamorous, not because she generated headlines, because she was steady, because she understood that inside the royal family, trust is built slowly and lost instantly. That background matters enormously for this story, because the woman sources describe as having formed a specific private assessment of Meghan. Markle is not a gossip, not a schemer, not someone with a personal axe to grind or a position to protect. She is the woman the royal family trusts precisely because she has proven, under genuine pressure, that she can be trusted. This makes what sources allege she witnessed during the Fab Four period so significant. But before we get there, understand exactly where Sophie sits within this family today. She is 59 years old. She carries out more public engagements annually than almost any other working royal. Her charity work, particularly around preventing avoidable blindness globally, has taken her to conflict zones that most senior royals would never visit. South Sudan, Sierra Leone, Ukraine. She does not do this for headlines. The work generates relatively little press coverage compared to the attention other royals receive for considerably less demanding appearances. She does it because it matters to her. And that authenticity, sources suggest, is exactly why William trusts her judgment above almost anyone outside his immediate family. William and Sophie's relationship is not widely discussed publicly. They do not generate the kind of joint coverage that produces obvious documentary evidence of closeness, but sources consistently describe their bond as genuine and significant. She is one of the few people in that family whose private counsel William actively seeks rather than simply tolerates. So, here's the question at the heart of this entire story. How does a woman with that reputation, that track record, and that level of institutional trust end up forming a permanent negative assessment of Meghan Markle? Not a temporary reservation, not a cautious wait-and-see position. A permanent assessment that, sources suggest, has never once been revised despite years passing and circumstances changing dramatically. The answer, sources suggest, begins in the brief extraordinary window when William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan operated as a joint unit, the Fab Four period, late 2017 through early 2019. Roughly 18 months ago, the world fell in love with the idea of a modernized monarchy led by two glamorous couples working in harmony. Behind that image, sources suggest, something else entirely was happening. Meghan arrived in royal life with a social style that was genuinely different from anything the family had encountered before. Warm, physically expressive, comfortable with intimacy in the casual American way that treats a hand on someone's arm or a leaned-in conversation as simply a normal human connection. In most environments, warmth is an asset. It is engaging. It is magnetic. It is part of what made the public fall for Meghan so quickly in those early months. But the British royal family is not in most environments, and William is not most people. Sources describe William as intensely private in personal interactions, physically reserved in a way that goes beyond standard British reserve into something more pronounced and more personal. People who have worked with him closely for years describe a man who maintains careful boundaries, even with people he genuinely likes. The collision of Meghan's social style with William's personal boundaries, sources suggest, created friction that most people never saw. Sophie saw it. And what she allegedly witnessed during those 18 months is where this story starts to get very interesting. What Sophie allegedly witnessed, the William dynamic. There is a private gathering that sources keep coming back to when this story comes up. Not a state occasion, not a formal royal engagement with cameras and coordinated outfits and carefully managed seating arrangements. A private family event. The kind that never appears on official royal calendars and never generates press coverage because the people present understand that what happens inside those walls stays inside those walls. Sources are deliberately vague about the specific occasion, the date, the location, the full guest list. But they are not vague about what allegedly happened, or who was watching when it did. To understand why this specific dynamic matters so much, you first need to understand how the Fab Four period actually worked behind the scenes. The public image was carefully constructed. William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan are presenting a united front. Joint engagements, coordinated causes, the deliberate projection of a modernized monarchy that felt relevant and human in a way previous royal generations had struggled to achieve. That image required constant work, constant coordination, regular private time together as a group, working through logistics, aligning on messaging, and navigating the complicated personal and professional overlap of four people with four distinct personalities trying to function as a coherent unit. In practice, sources suggest that regular private contact created opportunities for the differences between those four personalities to surface in ways that public appearances never revealed. And the most significant difference, sources suggest, was between Meghan and William. Here is what sources describe specifically. Meghan's social style in private settings is warm, direct, and physically expressive in a way that reflects her American cultural background entirely naturally. She makes sustained eye contact. She leans into conversations. She touches arms, shoulders, and hands in the way that American social culture treats as simply normal, engaged interaction. For most people in most rooms, that warmth lands well. It is engaging. It signals genuine interest and connection. William is not most people in most rooms. Sources who have spent time around William in private settings consistently describe a man with pronounced physical boundaries, not cold or unfriendly. But he is careful about his personal space in a way that people who know him well learn quickly and respect automatically. Staff who have worked closely with him describe an unspoken rule around physical interaction that longtime royal aides understand very well. You do not initiate physical contact with William. You follow his lead entirely. A handshake when he extends his hand. Nothing more without a clear signal from him first. Sources suggest Meghan either did not know this protocol or did not follow it. In private settings during the Fab Four period, sources describe interactions between Meghan and William that created visible discomfort, not dramatic scenes, not confrontations that anyone present could point to as a single decisive moment. A hand on his arm during a conversation that stayed a beat too long. A leaned-in exchange that entered his personal space in a way that sources describe as making him visibly tense. A familiarity in private that contrasts sharply with the careful formality William maintains even with people he has known for decades. Sophie allegedly observed these interactions directly, and sources say her reaction was not to chalk it up to cultural misunderstanding or innocent unfamiliarity with royal protocol. Her reaction, sources suggest, was sharper than that. Because there is a difference between someone who does not know the boundaries and someone who knows them and tests them anyway. And sources suggest Sophie's assessment, formed across multiple private occasions, was that Meghan understood William's discomfort and continued regardless. That assessment, if accurate, changes the entire character of what she was allegedly observing. Now, here is the question worth sitting with at this point in the story. Was Sophie right? Was Meghan genuinely testing boundaries deliberately? Or was she simply being herself in a cultural environment that had no real framework for her particular version of warmth? Sources do not claim to know Meghan's intentions. Nobody can. But they are consistent about Sophie's interpretation, and about what she allegedly did with that interpretation, because sources suggest Sophie did not keep her concerns entirely to herself. She did not brief the press, she did not call a family meeting, she did not make any dramatic move that could be pointed to as interference or manipulation. But she talked to Kate, and that conversation, sources suggest, was the moment the Fab Four's already fragile private dynamic shifted into something that could not be repaired. What Kate allegedly said in response, what she had apparently already been observing independently, and how the alignment between Sophie and Kate's private assessments allegedly set in motion a chain of events that ended with Meghan on a plane to California. That is where this goes next. Kate's wall goes up, and the bridesmaid dress was never really about tights. 5 days before the royal wedding of the decade, Windsor Castle, May 2018, Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress fitting. What the world eventually heard about that afternoon was a story about tights, about whether Charlotte should wear them or not, about a disagreement between two sisters-in-law over a detail so minor it barely registers as a reason for genuine conflict. That is not what that afternoon was actually about. Sources suggest the dress-fitting argument was the visible eruption of something that had been building quietly for months. Pressure that had accumulated across private gatherings, closed-door meetings, and a series of interactions that Kate had been carrying largely alone. And it finally broke the surface over a pair of children's tights. To understand Kate's role in this story properly, you have to understand who Kate Middleton actually is beneath the careful public image. She is not simply a graceful figurehead who smiles at engagements and wears beautiful clothes and says the right thing at the right moment. That image, while not inaccurate, is deeply incomplete. Kate spent 9 years navigating a relationship with the heir to the British throne before she became his wife. 9 years of intense public scrutiny, private pressure, and the kind of sustained personal discipline that most people genuinely cannot imagine. She was photographed relentlessly. She was written about cruelly. She endured tabloid coverage that would have broken most people. She did not break. People who know Kate privately describe a woman with remarkable emotional intelligence and an almost uncanny ability to read rooms, dynamics, and people with accuracy. She notices things. She files things away. She rarely confronts directly because direct confrontation is not how the royal family operates, and Kate understands that instinctively. But she watches, constantly, and she remembers everything she sees. Sources suggest Kate had been watching the dynamic between Meghan and William for months before that dress fitting. Not with jealousy. Sources are consistent on this point, and it matters. Kate is not described as a jealous or insecure person by people who know her well. Her relationship with William is, by all credible accounts, genuinely solid. Their partnership is built on shared values, mutual respect, and the kind of deep familiarity that comes from building a life together across more than 15 years. What sources describe Kate feeling was not jealousy. It was something colder, more specific, more difficult to name, but impossible to ignore once it had taken shape. Wariness, a heightened attention. The particular alertness of someone who has noticed a pattern they cannot quite explain, but cannot stop noticing either. Sources suggest Kate and Sophie's private conversation during this period was not a dramatic confrontation or an orchestrated campaign against Meghan. It was quieter than that. Two women who both had access to private settings, who had both been observing the same dynamic from different angles, were comparing notes, and finding, sources suggest, that their observations lined up in ways that neither had fully expected. Now here's the question this section needs to answer honestly. Does any of this make Meghan guilty of deliberate wrongdoing? Sources are careful here, consistently careful. Nobody discussing this story claims to know Meghan's intentions. Intentions are internal, they are not observable. What sources describe is behavior. specific observable behavior in private settings that created specific reactions in specific people who were present. Whether that behavior was deliberate boundary testing or genuine cultural miscommunication is a question that may never have a clean answer. But the bridesmaid dress argument gives us something useful for understanding what had already happened between these women by May 2018. Because Harry's own account in Spare describes Kate arriving at that dress fitting in a particular emotional state, stressed, tearful at some point during the exchange. The two women ended the afternoon in a place of significant tension that required a formal note of apology to resolve. Now, set that account alongside the reports from Page 6 and other outlets that contradicted Harry's version entirely. It was Meghan who reduced Kate to tears, that Kate left that fitting deeply upset in a way that went far beyond a disagreement about children's hosiery. Two opposite accounts of the same afternoon. Sources suggest the reason the two accounts diverge so dramatically is that both women experienced that afternoon through the lens of everything that had allegedly already happened between them. Kate was not crying about tights. Meghan was not distressed about tights. The tights were simply the moment when months of accumulated tension finally found somewhere to break through. And Sophie, sources suggest, knew exactly what that tension was rooted in, because she had allegedly been watching it build since the very beginning of the Fab Four period. What happened when Sophie's private assessment began quietly influencing the people around her, and how that influence allegedly accelerated a chain of events that ended with the Sussexes on a plane and a door that is never fully reopened. That is what comes next. The palace closes ranks, and Meghan finds herself alone. Something changed inside Kensington Palace in the autumn of 2018. Not dramatically, not with a single announced decision or a formal restructuring that generated press coverage. Just a quiet, unmistakable shift in temperature. Staff noticed it first. They always do. The people who move through those corridors daily, who manage the logistics of royal life, who observe the interactions between family members in unguarded moments, they felt it before anyone put words to it. The warmth that had surrounded the Fab Four project was cooling, quickly. And it was cooling in one specific direction, toward Meghan. To understand the full weight of what happened during this period, look at 4 documented parallel developments that have each been reported independently across multiple credible sources. Because when you lay them side by side, a pattern emerges that is very difficult to explain as a coincidence. The first is the staff situation. In October 2018, the Times of London published a report that Meghan's personal staff had raised formal complaints about her management style. The report described early morning emails sent before reasonable working hours. Demands were made at times that left staff unable to maintain normal professional boundaries. A working environment that multiple members of staff found genuinely unsustainable. This was not anonymous internet speculation. This was a report in one of Britain's most respected and legally cautious newspapers, sourced to people with direct knowledge of the internal situation. Buckingham Palace subsequently confirmed it had investigated the complaints. That confirmation alone tells you something significant. Palace investigations into staff treatment of senior royals are not routine. They do not happen unless the concerns raised are serious enough to require formal attention. By early 2019, the staff turnover around Meghan was extraordinary by any reasonable measure. Multiple senior members of her personal team had resigned within her first 2 years. People who had managed royal households for decades and navigated the particular pressures of that environment without incident found themselves unable to continue in their roles. The second development was the formal separation of households. In June 2019, Kensington Palace announced that Harry and Meghan would be establishing their own separate household at Buckingham Palace, distinct from the Cambridge operation they had previously shared administratively. The official explanation was operational. 2 growing royal operations require dedicated staff and infrastructure. Sources suggest the operational explanation was accurate as far as it went. It simply did not capture the full picture. Because the separation of households was not primarily a logistical decision, it was a relationship decision, a formal institutional acknowledgement that the working relationship between the two couples had broken down beyond the point where proximity was manageable. William and Harry were barely speaking privately by this point. Multiple credible sources confirm that the relationship had deteriorated severely. The brothers who had once been genuinely close, who had supported each other through the most painful public experiences any young people could face, were now navigating something much more painful and much more permanent than a simple disagreement. Sources suggest the household separation was William's decision. Quiet, firm, final. He did not want a conversation about it. He wanted distance, and he got it. The third development is the Sandringham Summit of January 2020. This meeting has been extensively reported. Harry and Meghan are meeting with the Queen, Charles, and William at Sandringham House to discuss the couple's desire to step back from senior royal duties. The meeting that effectively began the formal process of what became known as Megxit. What has been less extensively reported is the private atmosphere inside that meeting. Sources describe William arriving at Sandringham that day in a state of controlled fury, not the kind that shouts, the kind that goes completely still and completely cold and makes itself felt through the total absence of warmth, rather than any visible display of anger. He had been given very little notice of the meeting's agenda. Harry and Meghan had leaked their intention to step back to the press before telling the family formally. The Queen had been blindsided. Charles had been blindsided. William had been blindsided. For a man who values control and process and institutional integrity above almost everything, that sequence of events was not simply hurtful. It was, in William's view, sources suggest, a fundamental betrayal of the family's private protocols. He sat through that meeting. He said what needed to be said. He participated in the process of working out what the formal arrangements would look like. And he left Sandringham that day, sources suggest, with his private assessment of the Sussex situation permanently and irreversibly set. The fourth development is the one most directly connected to Sophie's alleged role in this story. Because during this same period, the private conversations among senior royals about Meghan's long-term future in the institution had shifted completely in character. Earlier conversations had focused on integration, how to support Meghan, how to help her navigate an institution with rules that were nowhere written down, how to manage the inevitable friction between her background and the particular demands of royal life. By late 2018, those conversations had changed entirely. They were no longer about integration. They were about something harder, whether the current situation was workable at all, what the institution's realistic options were if it was not, and what a managed exit might look like if it became necessary. Sophie was part of those conversations. Sources suggest her contribution was consistent and specific. She did not speak emotionally. She did not frame her concerns in personal terms. She laid out what she had allegedly observed, the behavioral patterns, the specific incidents, the particular dynamic with William that she had watched develop across multiple private occasions. She presented it the way she presents everything, calmly, factually, without drama. And sources suggest the people in that room listened in the way people listen when someone they completely trust tells them something they have been half suspecting but not quite willing to say out loud. Harry was not part of those conversations. That detail is perhaps the most significant in terms of what followed, because Harry was operating on a completely different understanding of what was happening around him and why. His account, across multiple interviews and throughout Spare, is entirely consistent on this point. He interpreted the family's growing coldness as prejudice, the institution's inability to accept Meghan for who she was. Racism, explicit and institutional, operates through the press and the palace simultaneously. That interpretation is not without foundation. The British press coverage of Meghan during this period included elements that were genuinely indefensible and that carried clear racial undertones. Respected media commentators acknowledged it at the time. It is documented, it is real, but sources suggest Harry's framework, however valid in certain dimensions, was missing another layer entirely. A layer that had nothing to do with race or nationality or Hollywood or cultural misunderstanding. A layer rooted in specific observed moments in private rooms. Moments Harry was not present for. Moments that were never discussed with him directly, because the people who had witnessed them did not believe a direct conversation with Harry was possible by that point. The family had tried indirect approaches, gentle suggestions about slowing down, quiet encouragement to seek advice from people with long institutional experience, careful hints that certain dynamics were creating concern among people whose opinions mattered. Harry had interpreted every one of those approaches as attacks on Meghan, as the establishment circles her, as proof of the prejudice he was already primed to see. So, the conversations moved around him instead of through him, and the decisions that followed were made in rooms he was never invited into. By January 2020, when Harry sat in Sandringham and heard the formal terms of his family's response to Megxit, the private architecture of what was happening had been under construction for well over a year. He was experiencing the conclusion of a process he had never known was underway. The question that remains is whether any of it could have ended differently, whether a direct conversation at the right moment might have changed the trajectory, whether Harry, if he had known what Sophie and Kate had allegedly been observing and discussing, might have engaged differently with what was happening around him. Sources suggest the window for that conversation closed earlier than most people realize, and the person whose private assessment most definitively closed it is the same person who has never spoken about any of this publicly, and almost certainly never will. The point of no return. What Sophie knows. That changes everything. Earlier this year, something happened that royal watchers noticed but nobody fully explained. Harry made a trip to the United Kingdom, brief, quietly arranged. Officially connected to his ongoing legal proceedings against British tabloids, the case against Mirror Group newspapers that Harry has pursued with a determination that has surprised even people who know him well. But sources suggest the legal case was not the only reason for that visit. Sources describe a series of private conversations that took place during Harry's time in the country. Not with Charles in any format that generated press coverage. Not with William in any setting that produced photographs or official statements. Quieter than that. More tentative, more human. The kind of conversations that happen when someone is testing whether a door that has been closed for years has any give left in it. The answer Harry allegedly received was not warm, not hostile, not a dramatic rejection that could be pointed to publicly as evidence of bad faith on the family's part. Nothing that could be clipped and shared and used to support a narrative of royal cruelty. Just the particular coolness of people who have made a private decision and are not revisiting it. Sources suggest Sophie was not present at those conversations. She did not need to be. Her position had been communicated clearly enough through the right channels to the right people over enough years that her physical presence in any specific room was no longer required. Her influence was already there, embedded in the family's collective private understanding of the Sussex situation, woven into William's settled view, present in every conversation about reconciliation that quietly went nowhere. And that is the heart of what this final section needs to answer. Not simply what Sophie allegedly witnessed during the Fab Four period, not just how it shaped the private dynamic that preceded Megxit, but why does it still function in 2026 as arguably the most significant invisible obstacle to any genuine Sussex reconciliation? Why a private assessment formed in 2017 and 2018 continues to shape decisions being made today? The answer starts with understanding the current royal landscape clearly. Queen Elizabeth is gone. The gravitational center that held the family together through sheer moral authority is no longer there. Her ability to absorb impossible tensions, to make people feel simultaneously accountable and protected, to find the path through situations that seemed irresolvable, that ability died with her at Balmoral in September 2022. Charles is king, but he is 76 years old and managing an active cancer diagnosis. His energy for navigating complex family dynamics is genuinely limited. Sources suggest his approach to the Sussex question has become increasingly passive. Not indifferent, passive, hoping that time and circumstance will create openings that direct intervention has repeatedly failed to produce. William is the one making the real decisions about access, about proximity, about who belongs inside the private life of the monarchy and who does not, about what reconciliation would actually require and whether those requirements are realistic. And William's most trusted counsel outside his immediate family is Sophie. That combination creates something that no Sussex public relations strategy can effectively counter. You cannot negotiate with a private assessment held by someone who never speaks publicly. You cannot reframe a narrative that exists entirely in private conversations you are not part of. You cannot change a mind that was made up in a closed room years ago and has been given no reason to reconsider since. Sources suggest the Sussex camp has periodically explored whether any back channel exists, whether there is a conversation to be had with Sophie directly or indirectly, whether some gesture, some acknowledgement, some demonstration of changed understanding might create movement in a situation that has been completely static for years. Sources suggest those explorations have not found traction, not because Sophie is vindictive. That characterization would be both unfair and inaccurate. Sophie is not a vindictive person. Her track record across 25 years of royal life demonstrates consistently that she does not operate from personal animosity or institutional politics. She operates from assessment, from observation, from the quiet accumulation of evidence across time. And sources suggest her assessment of Meghan, formed during the Fab Four period and reinforced by everything that followed, has never produced evidence sufficient to revise it. Now, here is the question. This story has to answer honestly before it concludes. Is Sophie right? That question deserves a genuine answer, rather than a dramatically satisfying one. Meghan Markle arrived in the British royal family carrying an impossible combination of factors: American, mixed race, divorced, from an entertainment industry that operates by social rules almost opposite to those governing royal life. The gap between her world and the institution she was entering was not small, it was vast, and she was expected to cross it almost instantly under relentless public scrutiny, while simultaneously managing a relationship with a man who had his own complicated history with that institution. The social codes of the British royal family are not documented anywhere accessible. They are absorbed through proximity across years and decades. Meghan had months. She was learning rules that nobody would explicitly state while being judged against standards nobody would openly articulate. That context is real. It matters. It deserves honest weight in any assessment of what went wrong during the Fab Four period. But sources suggest Sophie's concerns were never rooted in Meghan's cultural adjustment difficulties. The distinction matters enormously. Cultural adjustment difficulties are understandable. They are forgivable. They are the kind of thing that time, patience, and genuine goodwill on all sides can resolve. What sources describe Sophie allegedly observing was something different, more specific, more behavioral, more connected to particular moments and particular interactions than to the general friction of someone finding their footing in an unfamiliar world. Whether that distinction is valid is something only the people who were present in those private rooms can truly answer, and none of them are speaking publicly. What sources are unambiguous about is the consequence. The Sussex return question resurfaces periodically in royal commentary, with a persistence that suggests a genuine public appetite for reconciliation. Polls consistently show that a significant portion of the British public would welcome Harry back into royal life in some capacity. The emotional pull of two brothers reunited, of a family healed, is real and powerful, and the media understands it perfectly. But sources suggest the public appetite for reconciliation and the private reality inside the palace are operating in completely different worlds. Because the people whose private assessments actually determine what reconciliation would require are not moved by public sentiment. They are not reading the polls. They are not watching the Sussex media appearances and updating their views based on how Meghan presents herself in a carefully produced Netflix series. They form their views in private rooms, from direct observation, across specific moments that the public never saw and will never see. Sophie formed hers earlier than most, expressed them more clearly than most, and sources suggest has maintained them more consistently than most. The Fab Four is long gone. The coordinated engagements, the joint appearances, the carefully managed image of four people building something new together, all of it is history now. What remains is a family navigating a fracture that has never fully been acknowledged publicly and has never come close to being repaired privately. And somewhere in the explanation for why that fracture stays open, why every tentative move toward reconciliation loses momentum before it produces anything real, sources suggest you find Sophie, not shouting, not campaigning, not doing anything that could be pointed to, quoted, or used as evidence of interference, just present, trusted, consistent, holding a private verdict that was delivered once clearly to the right people, and that has quietly shaped everything since. The cameras captured the smiles, the public saw the promise of something new and hopeful and modern. Sophie allegedly saw something else. And in this family, in these rooms, among these people, what Sophie sees matters more than almost anything the cameras ever captured. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has never said any of this publicly. She never will. That is exactly what makes her the most powerful figure in this entire story. She does not need to speak. Her private verdict was delivered once, to the right people, in the right rooms, and it has never been revised. The Sussex return that Harry's supporters keep predicting. The reconciliation the public keeps hoping for. Sources suggest Sophie's quiet, permanent assessment is the reason neither ever quite arrives. Was she right? Or did she...